Come learn about phylogenetics, the study of the evolutionary relationships among species, and how this was used in an episode of Star Trek Voyager, starting now. Hello, my name is Mohammed Noor. I'm a biology professor at Duke University, and I'm an occasional science consultant for the Star Trek universe. I'm very excited to talk with you today about phylogenetics. This is the set of tools that biologists use on traits or DNA to infer the evolutionary history of species. And I'm going to talk today about how these tools were applied in an episode of Star Trek Voyager to study whether some aliens they encountered might have actually come from Earth. Ooh. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So this discussion comes from the Voyager episode Distant Origin. In it, some reptilian alien paleontologists find human remains and end up seeking the USS Voyager. Now, one of these aliens gets caught by the Voyager crew. And the doctor says, quote, "I've analyzed the alien's DNA. There are 47 genetic markers identical to those found in human DNA." The doctor then infers that humans and these aliens share a common ancestor around 400 million years ago. So what are these genetic markers and how are they used to tell ancestry? Well, all this ties to a field in biology called phylogenetics, which is the study of evolutionary relationships. So you may have heard of the tree of life. Now you read these trees starting at the tips, and these tips are the modern day species, and then you work back in time by going down. Now, if species have recent shared ancestors just a little way down from the top on this tree, then they're considered more closely related. Like dog and fox have more recent shared ancestors and are more closely related than dog and cat are. Now, this is the same way someone might look at a family tree. Now, you and your sibling are at the tips and you're considered close relatives, and you have very recent shared ancestors, which are your parents. You and your cousins have shared ancestors further back, your grandparents, etc. So this works the same with species in these trees of life. And these trees of life are called phylogenies. Now today, these phylogenies are often inferred using DNA sequences and computer algorithms. Now, genetic similarity by itself could imply close relationship, but it's not enough. Let me give you an example. Let's say that all these lineages have the same sequence of DNA letters. Now I'm going to introduce a mutation here. Now if you fast forward to the end, these two lineages have the new mutation, and you might correctly infer that these two lineages are closely related. They're very similar in sequence. However, if you're just looking at similarity in these DNA letters, you'd also incorrectly say these other three lineages are closely related to each other. That would be wrong. Now, one classic method for making these trees is to focus specifically on what are called shared derived traits. These are traits or DNA letters that arose recently but are shared between two or more species. And you know they arose recently because multiple species that you know are distantly related don't have those letters. This method is called parsimony because it assumes the simplest explanation, or in this case, the smallest number of evolutionary changes. Overall, these phylogenies are used for understanding evolutionary relationships. But interestingly, they can also have practical applications, like mapping the progression of disease outbreaks, or even in criminal investigations around virus transmission, like with HIV. Basically, DNA in these approaches are used to infer who infected who, or how an outbreak originated. Very cool. Well, it's this sort of phylogenetic technique that was applied by the Voyager doctor and the paleontologists in this episode. It's likely that the 47 genetic markers shared between humans and the alien reflect a set of DNA letters that are common to reptiles and mammals, but not found in sharks and frogs. And that would suggest that we are more closely related to the Voth than to fish or frogs. And that would imply that the aliens probably came from Earth. Now, the aliens may share even more genetic markers with some other Earth animals like birds, which are basically living dinosaurs. Anyway, recapping some of the main science points here. Phylogenetics is the study of evolutionary relationships. These relationships are often inferred using DNA sequences and statistical methods, and phylogenetics is broadly applied in a variety of areas. Anyway, overall, it's another cool application of a genetic concept to a really interesting Star Trek episode. Had you heard of phylogenetics before, or how these kinds of tools could be used to study disease or investigate crimes? Let us know in the comments, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of BioTrekkie Explains. See you next time.